Welcome back, everyone. We're diving right into a seriously massive explainer today. We are unpacking the incredibly rich, complex history of the Philippines, but we're looking at it through a specific lens, as a crucible. We are going to explore how centuries of foreign domination, intense internal trials, and rapid global shifts literally forged an unbreakable Filipino spirit. This is a story of survival, adaptation, and profound resilience. Here's our roadmap. We're moving through 6 distinct eras, from the earliest roots in Spanish colonization, right up through the American transition, World War II, independence, the People Power Revolution, and finally, the contemporary Philippines. It's a lot of ground, so let's get into it. To give us some bearings, we are looking at a huge sweep of time here. We're starting way back with the Spanish arrival in 1521, pushing through the Treaty of Paris in 1898, hitting independence in 1946, and landing on the 1986 People Power Revolution.
All right, Part 1, Roots and Spanish Colonization, the First Crucible.
So, before any foreign ships even appeared on the horizon, society here was already organized into these highly developed groups called barangays. These were led by a datu, basically a local chief, and they were built entirely on this deep-rooted system of loyalty to a patron. And this wasn't just politics. It was literally how you survived socially and economically. Think of it as the original political DNA of the Philippines. It's a system of favors and allegiances that somehow managed to outlast every single conqueror that came later. And honestly, it still heavily shapes the country's political structures today. Now, when the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, things changed drastically. But what's really fascinating is how they maintained control. They didn't just rely on military force. Instead, they relied heavily on Catholic friars to control the population. We're talking forced evangelization paired with incredibly heavy local taxation and restricted trade. Over the centuries, the church practically became the government. But as you can imagine, the sheer abuse of power by these religious orders and local administrators created this massive, simmering resentment among the native population. And naturally, decades of that kind of oppressive taxation and religious control inevitably reached a boiling point. Early on, you had educated elites like Jose Rizal making peaceful petitions, but eventually it shifted into a full-blown grassroots armed struggle, entered the Katipunan. This was a secret revolutionary society founded by Andres Bonifacio, and it completely galvanized the masses to fight back against those Spanish abuses, eventually sparking the Philippine Revolution of 1896. Moving on to Part 2, the American Transition, a Change of Masters. Look at the stark contrast here, where Spain kept control mostly through spiritual dominance and intentionally neglecting mass education. America totally pivoted. In a really surprising move, the new American administration actually sent hundreds of teachers over on decommissioned transport ships. Their goal? Establish public school systems, teach English, and push democratic ideals. At the same time, they were strategically co-opting the educated native elite to help manage local governments. It was a very calculated shift away from religious control directly into institutional assimilation. But listen, we absolutely cannot gloss over the reality of how this transition actually went down. Despite all the new schools and infrastructure, the takeover was unbelievably violent. During the Philippine-American War, Filipino forces had to rely on guerrilla tactics against a vastly superior American military. And the American response? A brutal, scorched earth policy. So right underneath this proclaimed mask of benevolence, civilians were suffering immensely, losing their homes and their livelihoods in the crossfire of this harsh regime change. Which brings us to Part 3, World War II occupation, plunge into darkness. Jumping ahead to 1941, the Japanese occupation initially promised a sort of restoration of Asian prosperity, but the reality? An absolute nightmare. After Manila was swiftly captured and Corregidor fell in 1942, the Japanese imposed what they called the economic triangle. This was a devastating ban on basic commodities. We're talking rice, sugar, clothes, all of it. The sources paint just a grim picture here. Severe malnutrition, total press censorship, and horrifying abuses by the military police. Civilians were just living in constant daily fear of torture and forced espionage. But staying true to the whole theme of our explainer here, resilience. That immense suffering birthed an incredibly fierce resistance. This is where we see the Hukbalahap. Formed in 1944, this wasn't some elite military force. This was a peasant-born, grassroots people's army. Operating out in the provinces, they ran guerrilla warfare, sabotaged Japanese supply lines, and protected local communities. It just proves that even in literally the darkest hours, that drive for liberation couldn't be stamped out.
All right, part 4, independence and martial law, internal oppression. So, fast forward to 1946. Independence! Liberation from foreign powers was obviously a massive victory, but the country inherited an economy that was practically in ashes. That Reconstruction period was incredibly tough, dragged down by systemic debt and those deeply entrenched patron-client politics we mentioned earlier. The government was really struggling to provide for the people, and that growing instability, paired with rising social unrest, it set the perfect, dangerous stage for dictatorship, proving that just getting rid of foreign flags doesn't magically fix a fractured system. And all that internal instability eventually hit a critical breaking point. In September 1972, President Ferdinand Marcos issued Proclamation 1081, officially declaring martial law. In one single move, he seized absolute power and suspended civil liberties, plunging the Philippines into 14 incredibly dark years of authoritarian rule, all justified under the guise of maintaining peace and order. The human cost of those 14 years is just staggering. Based on the historical sources, over 50,000 individuals were detained without trial. 50,000. And we're talking about activists, teachers, labor leaders, political opponents. This entire era was defined by the harsh suppression of dissent, strict media censorship, and severe human rights violations. It created this suffocating atmosphere of fear that silenced the nation for more than a decade. Part 5. The People Power Revolution. The breaking point. But as you know, oppression breeds resistance. This sequence perfectly breaks down how they finally reached the boiling point. First, you have deepening economic turmoil sparking massive labor protests. Then, the absolute catalyst, the assassination of opposition leader Ninoy Aquino in 1983, right there on the airport tarmac. That public outrage just snowballed, leading directly into Step 3, the 1986 EDSA Uprising. Named after the massive highway in Metro Manila where millions of people gathered, this was a monumental, entirely peaceful revolution that finally ousted the Marcos regime. This quote really hits the nail on the head regarding the paradigm shift that happened. Dissent and resistance completely evolved. It moved away from just elitist organizations secretly conspiring against Marcos and transformed into a massive, broad-based mobilization of the masses. It was ordinary, everyday citizens taking to the streets to physically reclaim their democracy. Finally, Part 6. The Contemporary Philippines, Identity and Growth. The modern Philippines has fought incredibly hard to shake off the weight of its historical stagnation. It was once dubbed the sick man of Asia because of heavy debts and struggling import policies. But the contemporary economy has actually seen some massive periods of high economic growth. By leaning heavily into a super robust modern banking system, incredibly strong IT-based service sectors, and the immense power of global remittances, the nation has dynamically adapted its unique blend of heritage into a serious globalized force. However, we do have to look at what hasn't changed. Remember those pre-colonial barangays we talked about right at the start? The sources make it very clear that the ancient system of personalistic networks and political patronage is still deeply embedded in everyday life today. It's practically woven into the culture, remaining a huge factor for everything from climbing the social ladder to basic economic survival. So when you look at it all together, today's Filipino identity is this incredibly complex, rich tapestry. It's literally woven from survival. It holds tightly to indigenous folklore and deeply ingrained Catholic roots, all while seamlessly coexisting with modern globalized influences. And think about the massive global diaspora. It acts like a mini Philippines spread all over the world. It's a culture constantly performing this balancing act, weighing the heavy memory of its past against the rapid, often cynical pace of the modern world. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. When your entire identity is forged in the fires of over 400 years of foreign occupation, world wars, and intense internal struggle, how do you maintain a unique cultural soul amidst the crush of modern globalization? It's a huge question and a profound testament to the incredible resilience we've explored today. I hope this deep dive gave you a powerful new perspective. Keep asking questions, keep digging into the history, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.